The air smelled of dampness and the anticipation of autumn. Lena sat on a park bench, trying to focus on her art history notes, but her thoughts kept wandering. They bounced between her upcoming exam, tomorrow's date with Artyom, and a strange sense of emptiness that had become her constant companion. She and Artyom had been together for almost 2 years, and their relationship was like a cozy but well-worn sweater. They knew each other by heart, his jokes, her habit of wrinkling her nose when she was deep in thought, their shared favorite movies. It was a friendship disguised as a couple's routine. Their conversations were predictable, their meetings comfortable, but there was no spark, no depth, none of that poignant feeling she so often saw in books and films. Today, she had once again put off her studies for a meeting with him. He had invited her to their favorite coffee shop, but she knew the conversation would be the same as always: weekend plans, the latest university gossip, what they'd do after graduation. These talks felt like backdrops to someone else's life, vibrant, but completely irrelevant to her. "Lena, you're not here again," she heard a familiar voice say. She looked up and saw Artyom standing in front of her with 2 coffee cups. He smiled his usual, slightly naive smile, and Lena felt a pang of guilt. He was a good guy, and she didn't want to hurt him. "Just thinking," she replied, taking her cup. "Thanks." They sat in silence for a long time, watching people pass by. Lena hesitated to speak, and Artyom, it seemed, didn't even notice her silence. Suddenly, she felt a wave of fear. She was afraid that this was how it would always be, sitting beside him, listening to him talk about a future they would never build together. To try and distract herself from her dark thoughts, Lena decided to check out a new gallery her friend had told her about. She was walking down a narrow, cobbled alley when a lone man caught her attention. He was standing in front of a painting, and he was older than her, perhaps by 10 years or more. Dressed casually but with an undeniable, subtle style, he was looking at the canvas as if trying to decipher some secret within it. The painting was unusual. A girl's face was depicted against a dark background, as if snatched from the shadows by a single beam of light. Her eyes were full of melancholy and, at the same time, a hidden strength. The man stood there for so long that Lena, without even realizing it, stopped beside him. "It seems she's made up her mind about something," he said without turning to her. "But she doesn't know what yet." His voice was low and velvety, with a slight huskiness that made it even more compelling. Lena started at the suddenness of it. "I think she just wants someone to notice her," she replied softly. He finally turned to face her, and Lena saw his eyes, dark, with a spark of curiosity and a hint of weariness. "You can notice a person on the street," he said with a wry smile. "But to really see them, that's different. Do you see yourself in her?" Lena felt a blush creep up her neck. I don't know. Maybe. I think sometimes we all want to be truly seen." The man smiled. His smile was a little sad, but genuine. "Maksim," he said, offering her his hand. "Lena." They stood by the painting for a long time, not saying another word. Lena felt an invisible connection form between them, something deeper than mere curiosity. For the first time in a long time, she didn't want to run from her own thoughts, because next to this stranger, they didn't seem so frightening. "I should go," she finally said, though she didn't want to leave. "Me too," Maksim replied. "But maybe we'll see each other again. Somewhere we can talk about paintings and other things." His words sounded like an offer she couldn't refuse. He was a piece of the world she had been missing. She nodded, and for the first time that day, a genuine smile appeared on her lips. The cafe was hidden in an alley between an antique shop and a gallery of 18th-century engravings. Inside, it was a dim twilight, as if the evening itself had crept in and didn't want to leave. The walls, decorated with vintage posters and warm canvases by local artists, reflected the flickering light of lamps that hung from the ceiling on long cords. Lena and Maksim sat at a round, slightly worn wooden table with a grapevine inlay. Between them, glasses of deep ruby wine caught the yellowish light on their surface, as if each sip held a small secret. Maksim lazily ran a finger along the rim of his glass. "You know, sometimes it seems that you become an adult not when you get a degree or a mortgage, but when you start drinking red wine and discussing paintings," he said, with a hint of irony but a deep weariness in his voice. Lena didn't answer right away. She watched a drop of wine on the glass slowly slide down, as if mirroring her own inner journey from confusion to curiosity. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as if to shield herself, but at the same time opening up. "Aren't you afraid that these conversations are just a game? That we're trying to seem more grown-up than we are?" Maksim chuckled. His gaze softened slightly. "If it's a game, then why does it hurt so much?" Outside, the city hummed, but here, in this secluded corner, everything seemed to stand still. Their words were like brushes applying invisible strokes to the as-yet unpainted canvas of their relationship. Maksim leaned closer, his hand accidentally brushing her neck. Lena felt a slight shiver run across her skin from his closeness, from fear, from a secret desire to be seen as more than just a conversational partner. Maksim made a brief gesture with his hand, inviting Lena to leave. Outside the cafe door, the air was damp with the evening noise of the city, and the streetlights flickered like golden drops on dark watercolor paper. They walked slowly, without haste. The cobblestone path shimmered under their steps, and each footfall seemed to be a confirmation of something unsaid. Lena felt the distance between them shrink not just physically, but in another, far more subtle dimension. "Do you always look at people so closely?" she asked, glancing away so as not to meet his eyes. "Only those who don't look at the world as if it's a backdrop," he replied. They stopped at a small embankment where the water lazed over the stones. The wind touched her hair, and Maksim, without a word, brushed a strand from her face. His fingers were so gentle, as if she were a fragile composition that could be ruined by a clumsy movement. Lena looked at the water. It reflected windows, clouds, the echoes of other lives. Her thoughts were jumbled. She felt desire, fear, excitement, and confusion all at once. It was as if her feelings were arguing inside her, like the lines in the painting where they had met. "I feel like I'm an adult. But I'm not sure that's right," she whispered. Maksim looked into her eyes for a long time, without any pressure. "Rightness is an illusion. You are real. That's so much more important." His words settled between them like quiet music, and at that moment, Lena understood, this evening would stay with her, even if everything else disappeared. Something subtly shifted after that evening at the cafe. Lena's world, which once seemed familiar and safe, suddenly began to break into tiny pieces, and Maksim started to reassemble them into a new, unfamiliar picture. His presence became not just a part of her life, but its center, the axis around which everything else revolved. Lena discovered that with him, she didn't have to be someone she wasn't. She didn't have to pretend to be an adult, to be experienced or indifferent. She could be fragile, full of doubts, or even silly, and he accepted her exactly as she was. It was so unusual and unfamiliar that at times she was frightened by this openness. With him, the need to protect herself, to hide her thoughts and feelings, disappeared, unlike with Artyom, where their communication was merely an exchange of scripted phrases rather than something truly profound. One evening, as they sat on the floor of her small studio, Lena felt her gaze settle on Maksim. He was strumming the strings of a guitar she had bought long ago but had never learned to play. His fingers moved clumsily but with a certain focused determination. In that moment, she was overcome by a wave of tenderness so powerful it took her breath away. It wasn't just attraction or simple affection. It was something more something that caused both a thrill and a sense of fear at the same time. He looked up and met her gaze. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. Lena couldn't answer. She just sat and stared at him. Her eyes held a mixture of admiration, fear, and some new, uncharted feeling. She suddenly realized she wanted him. Not just physically, but completely, his mind, his gaze, his hands. She wanted to be near him, to smell his scent, to hear his voice, to feel his touch. At that moment, Maksim set the guitar aside, moved closer to her, and carefully took her hands in his. She felt the warmth of his skin, his fingers gently squeezing her palms. It was such a simple yet incredibly intimate touch. He didn't look at her with desire, he looked with tenderness and understanding. And that was so much more important. He leaned in and kissed her. At first, it was cautious, as if he was afraid of startling her, but then it grew more insistent. In that moment, the world around Lena ceased to exist. There was no studio, no city outside the window, no Artyom, no more indecisiveness. There were only the two of them, and this kiss, which was at once the first and the only one in her life. Her body responded to his touch with a power she never knew she possessed. Every kiss, every touch, ignited a storm of emotions within her. She felt her body awaken, a passion stirring inside her that she had only ever read about in books. When they finally pulled apart, Lena looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. They were not tears of sadness, but of realization. The realization that everything before him had only been a prelude, a preparation for this very moment. You're real," Maksim whispered, his hand tracing her cheek. And in that moment, Lena understood that with him, she would finally become real. The day was grey, with rare streaks of light that reminded her of brushstrokes on a canvas, too thin to become hope, but bright enough not to disappear. Lena sat in a small cafe by the train station. It was empty, as if it were waiting only for her. On the table in front of her was a cup of cold coffee and a postcard. She held it between her fingers like a talisman, even though she knew that no words on paper could resolve what she had to feel for herself. Maksim didn't know she would come. It was a decision she'd made in the middle of the night, when she had tried to play her music but couldn't. Her fingers moved, but they wouldn't come alive. The music refused to sound, as if her emotions had lost their voice. "I can't play if I'm not honest with myself," she had written in the message. "If you want to, come." Now, in the silence of the cafe, she could almost hear an internal metronome, every minute beating in her chest like a measure of uncertainty. She didn't know if she wanted to explain. Or just to be. The door jingled. Maksim entered, his shoulders slightly tense. His gaze found her immediately, as if he hadn't even been looking. He walked over and sat down across from her without asking. For a few seconds, there was silence. "I came," he said, simply. Lena nodded. Her breathing became deeper, calmer. "I feel like if I don't say this out loud, I'll lose myself." "Then say it." "I'm not afraid to listen." She looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't try to hide what she was feeling. Her voice was filled with a trembling tenderness. "I'm lost. Between the fear of being real and the desire to be needed. You appeared when I was just beginning to wake up, and Artyom, that's what I've moved on from, but haven't let go of." Maksim listened without interrupting. He looked as if he saw not a solution in her, but a process. And that felt right. "I don't want you to be the answer. I need someone who will be there for me while I'm looking for my questions." He gave a soft, warm smile. "I think you've already found them. They're just sounding in you like music that hasn't been played yet." Time passed not in days, but in events. After the conversation in the cafe that left Lena with a feeling of warmth and a shiver, they started seeing each other more often. Not on a schedule, not out of necessity, just whenever they could. But every whenever was important. They walked through the city, where street musicians wove other people's emotions into the background. Sometimes they were silent, sometimes they argued, and sometimes they just listened not to the sounds, but to each other's presence. Maksim didn't intrude on her inner silences, he simply existed alongside them. This gave Lena an unusual feeling, that she didn't need to be saved, only to be accompanied. One day, she took him to a gallery where her early works were on display. He walked slowly, stopping in front of each canvas. "Here, you're frightened, but you're not saying it. And here, you're starting to speak, but you're afraid of being heard." He read her colors like a language, and it was both frightening and liberating. Lena looked at him as a person who didn't want to be a mirror, but was ready to be a light if she asked. Later, at her place, they sat on the floor, going through her musical sketches. Maksim picked up a guitar and began to play a little clumsily, but with feeling. "I'm not a musician," he smiled. "That doesn't matter. You make a sound." She rested her head on his shoulder not as a gesture of love, but as a gesture of trust. "I'm afraid it's too much. And I'm afraid that this is the only thing that's real."